I used to think stability was the goal. A house that doesn't need fixing, a husband who comes home on time, a son who's doing well enough that people nod approvingly when you mention him. I have all of that. And yet, every morning I wake up with a small ache I can't name. It's not pain exactly, more like the absence of surprise. My name is Laura. I'm 42, and I live in a quiet neighborhood where everyone waves, but no one really talks. Ryan, my husband, works in healthcare software. He's good at his job, calm under pressure, the kind of man who never forgets to take out the trash. We've been married 15 years. Our son Noah is 19, a college freshman studying something he'll probably change twice before deciding for real. I tell people we're doing great. They smile and move on, and I let them. Our mornings are practiced. The smell of coffee, the sound of his shoes on the tile, the predictable rhythm of a couple that hasn't had to discuss anything important in a long time. He reads the news on his phone while I butter toast. We talk about the weather, his next trip, a bill we forgot to pay. Nothing ever escalates. We're polite even when we're tired. That's what 15 years teaches you, how to live without friction. Sometimes I catch myself studying him the way you study a stranger on the train. Familiar shape, unknown story. There are moments when I almost say something real, something like, "Do you ever feel like we stopped moving?" But I don't. He wouldn't know what to do with that, and maybe I don't either. After he leaves, the house feels cleaner than it should. I load the dishwasher, water the plant by the window, check my email. I have a good job managing an office that prides itself on creativity, but mostly sells the illusion of it. Meetings, deadlines, polite jokes that land flat. My coworkers like me because I listen. I like them because they don't ask questions. Lunch breaks are quiet. I walk around the block, pass a coffee shop full of people who look busy pretending they're not lonely. I catch my reflection in the window and barely recognize the woman who's supposed to be me. Hair neat, face composed, expression neutral. I used to think I'd age into confidence. Instead, I've aged into predictability. By evening, Ryan's home. He tells me about a client who changed his mind mid-project, and I tell him about an intern who quit without warning. We eat dinner at the counter, side by side, facing the wall instead of each other. The TV plays softly in the background, just noise to fill the room. We laugh once, out of habit. After he goes to bed, I scroll through Noah's photos. A blurry dorm party, late night ramen, a view from his window with city lights and rain streaks. He looks happy, that should be enough. Still, I stare at those pictures longer than I should, as if studying proof that life still feels big somewhere. When the house finally goes quiet, I sit with my tea and think about how easy it is to drift without noticing. There's no drama, no fight, no betrayal, just small distances that grow quietly, like cracks under paint. People envy our calm, but calm can be a kind of forgetting too. That morning, pouring 2 cups of coffee like always, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed so hard I had to catch my breath. The thought startled me, not because it was tragic, but because it felt so ordinary, like discovering a room in your own house you haven't opened in years. Maybe this is what happens when everything works exactly as it should. Nothing breaks, nothing burns, but somewhere inside, something goes missing. And one day, you finally notice the space it left behind. The first time I saw Eli again, it was almost by accident. Noah's old school had invited alumni families to a spring event, and since Ryan was away on a business trip, I went alone. It felt strange walking those hallways again, the faint smell of gym floors and cafeteria food, the sound of a marching band warming up somewhere outside. Parents stood in small groups chatting about colleges, scholarships, and internships as if they were trading stock tips. I was halfway through a cup of weak coffee when I heard my name. "Mrs. Miller?" It took a second to recognize him, taller, sharper around the edges, a quiet steadiness in his posture that hadn't been there before. Eli. He used to spend hours in our backyard with Noah, throwing baseballs until the porch light came on. Back then, he was all energy and motion. Now, at 26, there was something still about him, as if he'd learned to move slower on purpose. "You probably don't remember me," he said, smiling. "I was always at your house. You used to bring us hot chocolate after practice." The memory hit instantly. 2 boys on the porch, steam rising from their mugs, Noah's laugh cutting through the cold air. I laughed softly. Of course I remember. You two nearly broke every window we owned. He grinned, but there was something in his eyes, an awareness that this wasn't just small talk. We caught up in that careful way people do when time has stretched between them. He told me he'd been living abroad for a few years, working odd jobs, not sure what came next. He'd moved back recently to help his mother and was looking for something steady. Seattle's changed, he said. Or maybe I did. The conversation flowed easier than I expected. There was no awkwardness, just a quiet familiarity, like picking up a thread that never really snapped. I noticed how he listened, not just waiting for his turn, but actually paying attention. Most people don't do that anymore. Someone called his name from across the courtyard. He waved, then looked back at me. "It's good seeing you," he said. "You always seemed kind." It was such a simple word, but it stayed with me long after I drove home. That evening, I told Ryan about the event. He asked how it went, and I mentioned running into Eli. He nodded, uninterested, already scrolling through emails. "That the kid who played shortstop with Noah?" "Yeah," I said. "He's back in town." Ryan muttered something about how everyone ends up back eventually and turned on the TV. I went upstairs early, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed Eli's voice, the unhurried way he spoke, the way he looked directly at people instead of through them. I realized how rare that had become, being seen without being summarized. The next few days passed normally, work, calls, grocery lists. But every so often, I'd catch myself wondering how he was doing, if he'd found a job, if he still drank his coffee black. It wasn't longing, not yet, just curiosity, the kind that grows quietly without asking permission. A week later, I saw him again, in the grocery store parking lot, juggling 2 paper bags and a set of keys that refused to cooperate. He laughed when he noticed me watching. "Guess some things don't change," he said. I offered to help, and somehow we ended up talking again, about nothing in particular, but with a kind of ease I hadn't felt in years. When I got home that night, Ryan was already asleep on the couch, the TV buzzing softly in the background. I stood there for a moment, looking at him, then at the faint reflection of myself in the window. Something in me shifted, barely perceptible, but real. For the first time in a long while, the stillness of my life didn't feel peaceful. It felt temporary. It started with coincidences. A few days after the parking lot, I saw Eli again at the farmer's market downtown. He was comparing apples, serious about it, like it mattered which one he picked. We laughed about running into each other twice in a week. He said something about fate, but in that casual, joking way that doesn't ask for a reaction. Still, it stayed in the air between us. We walked together through the stalls. He carried my bag without asking, and we talked about things that weren't important, but somehow didn't feel empty. Music, travel, how people pretend to be busier than they are. He told me he hadn't found a job yet, but he didn't sound defeated, just figuring it out. When we said goodbye, he hesitated before waving. It was the kind of pause you notice only later. That night, I mentioned him to Ryan again. "Eli's looking for work," I said. "He seems like he's trying to get back on track." Ryan didn't look up from his laptop. "Maybe he'll figure it out." Everyone does, eventually. It wasn't dismissive, just routine. We were both good at that, sounding engaged without actually connecting. A few days later, my car wouldn't start in the office parking lot. I sat there, pretending to Google solutions until I heard a knock on the window. Eli. He was working nearby and recognized my car. He offered to take a look and within minutes had it running again. I thanked him and he shrugged. "Guess I owe you for all that hot chocolate." We went for coffee after, mostly to warm up. The cafe was half empty, quiet except for the hum of the espresso machine. Conversation came easily again. He listened when I talked about work stress, about how every week felt like a repeat of the last. He didn't interrupt or try to fix anything, he just listened. It shouldn't have felt rare, but it did. Over the next few weeks, we kept bumping into each other at the store, near the park, once even at the gas station. It became a kind of pattern, though neither of us named it. Each meeting felt unplanned, but part of me started to wonder if we were both letting the coincidences happen. Ryan was gone most of that month, trade shows, client visits, places that blurred together. When he called at night, we talked about Noah's grades, the weather, our schedules. I said I missed him, and I think he said it back, though maybe we both just filled the silence out of habit. Eli and I started meeting for short coffee breaks. Nothing secret, not yet. We talked about books, music, the way adulthood feels like constant maintenance. Sometimes he'd ask about Noah, and I'd see a flicker of nostalgia cross his face. He'd grown into someone thoughtful, patient, quieter than before. He didn't look at me like a mom from his past, though. I noticed that too. I told myself it was harmless, that I was just talking to someone who reminded me what simple connection felt like. But it's strange how something small can start to matter when the rest of your life feels too still. One afternoon, as we sat in my car finishing our coffees, he said, "You always seem like you're trying to hold everything together." I laughed. "Isn't that the job description for adults?" He smiled, but his eyes didn't move away. "Maybe. But sometimes holding it all together keeps you from holding anything close." The word stayed with me long after he left. That evening, Ryan called from Denver. He sounded tired, distracted. I asked if his day went well. "Yeah," he said, "same as usual." For the first time, I didn't say, "Same here." And somewhere deep down, I knew the line between coincidence and intention had already blurred. It was raining the night Eli called. I'd just finished loading the dishwasher when my phone buzzed. His voice was calm, almost embarrassed. "Sorry, I know it's late. My car died near the lake. I'm kinda stuck here." I hesitated for a second. Ryan was away in Portland and the house felt too quiet anyway. "Text me your location," I said before I could overthink it. The rain hit harder as I drove. I found him parked near the water, hazard lights flashing weakly against the dark. He was sitting inside, jacket zipped to his chin. When I knocked on the window, he smiled like he wasn't sure if I'd actually come. He slid into the passenger seat while I called for roadside assistance. The heater hummed. Outside, the rain blurred everything into one color. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. It wasn't awkward, just still. Then he said, "You didn't have to come." "I didn't think you would." I kept my eyes on the road ahead. "You sounded like you needed someone." He looked at me for a moment. "I think I just needed to hear a familiar voice." He told me a bit about his time abroad, the temporary jobs, the nights spent in apartments that never felt like home. He said coming back here was supposed to be easy, but it wasn't. "Everything's familiar, but nothing fits anymore," he said quietly. I understood more than I wanted to admit. When the tow truck arrived, we sat there, waiting for the driver to finish, and the rain softened to a steady rhythm. He looked out the window, then back at me. "You know," he said, almost like a confession, "I used to watch you and Noah after practice. You'd always hand him his drink, check if he'd eaten, smile like it mattered every single time." I remember thinking, I wish someone looked at me like that. The words hung between us, and for a long moment, I couldn't find anything to say. Not because I was shocked, but because something in me recognized the same hunger. I'd spent years being reliable, present, functional, and somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. I turned to look at him. He wasn't leaning in, wasn't pushing for anything. He just waited, steady, open. When he reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. His fingers were cold, his touch uncertain but sincere. It didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like honesty we hadn't planned to tell. The kiss came quietly, unrushed, unplanned, nothing cinematic. It was the kind of closeness that doesn't ask for a future, only recognition. For a second, the world outside could have been anywhere. Then I pulled back, breath uneven but mind strangely clear. "I should go," I said. He nodded. "Yeah, you should." The drive home felt longer than it was. The streets were empty, the stoplights blinking yellow. When I stepped into the house, the smell of Ryan's cologne still lingered on his jacket hanging by the door. The TV remote was on the couch where he'd left it. I sat down, the screen lighting my face in a dull blue. It struck me then, not guilt, not regret, just the sharp awareness that something had changed. I wasn't sure what I wanted, but I knew it wasn't the same as before. Later, lying in bed, I listened to the rain soften against the roof. I told myself it was just one moment, that it didn't mean anything, but deep down, I already knew better. Some moments don't ask for permission to change you, they just do. After that night, I told myself it would fade. It didn't. Days passed like normal. Work, errands, small talk. But every quiet moment seemed to circle back to that rain-soaked car, the way his hand felt against mine, the calm that followed instead of chaos. I expected guilt, but what came instead was a strange clarity. For the first time in years, I felt awake. I tried to keep my distance. I deleted his number twice, memorized it without meaning to, then pretended not to notice when his messages appeared again. They were never reckless, never crossing a line outright. Just small things. Hope your day's not too heavy. Saw your car near the park. Made me smile. Simple words, but they landed differently than anything Ryan had said in years. We met once by accident, or what I told myself was an accident, at a coffee shop near my office. He was already there, reading something on his phone, and when he looked up, it was as if he'd been expecting me. I sat down. We talked about the weather, about Noah, about nothing at all. When he left, I realized how much I'd missed the sound of someone enjoying being near me. Ryan noticed something was different, though he couldn't name it. One evening, he studied me across the counter and asked, "You've been quieter lately? Everything okay?" "Just tired," I said too quickly. He nodded, poured himself another drink, and turned back to the game on TV. The moment passed like every other moment between us lately. Surface calm, no ripples. At night, I'd lie awake next to him, listening to his steady breathing, wondering when our lives had become so quiet that honesty felt like noise. I wasn't comparing him to Eli, not exactly. It was more like realizing I'd spent years waiting for something that never arrived, and then it did, but from the wrong direction. Eli and I saw each other a few more times, always brief, always in public. Once in a bookstore, once at a small diner where the waitress called everyone "sweetheart." We never talked about what had happened that night by the lake, but it lived there between us, shaping the air. I could feel it when he looked at me, and I knew he could too. Ryan began to notice more. The way I checked my phone and quickly flipped it over. The way I avoided his eyes during dinner. One night, he said, "You seem somewhere else lately." I wanted to tell him that I was, that I'd been somewhere else for years, long before Eli ever reappeared, but I didn't. I just said, "I'm fine," and we both knew it wasn't true. The following weekend, Ryan tried to plan a small getaway, a cabin near the coast, 2 nights, nothing fancy. "It might be good for us," he said. I agreed, even smiled. But deep down, I knew a trip couldn't fix what had gone missing. You can't rebuild a connection by pretending it never frayed. That night, when he reached for me in bed, his touch felt careful, almost cautious, as if he was afraid of confirming something he already suspected. I lay still, caught between 2 kinds of distance, the one that happens when you're apart, and the one that grows quietly when you're together. Later, when he fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling and thought about Eli's message from earlier that day. Some things don't ask to be understood, they just ask to be felt. I didn't reply, but my heart did. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, nothing dramatic. No slammed doors, no raised voices, just a moment that started quietly and didn't stop. Ryan came home early. I was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, half listening to the hum of the news. He stood in the doorway, longer than usual. When I turned around, he was watching me, not with anger, but with a kind of resigned understanding. "I saw you," he said. My hands froze in the water. "What do you mean?" "He didn't make me guess. You were with him. The kid, Eli. I saw you two at the cafe last week." He said it gently, like he'd been practicing. I didn't deny it. There didn't seem to be a point. He walked further in, resting against the counter, arms folded. "I'm not here to yell," he said quietly. "I just need to know Why? It wasn't the question itself that hurt. It was the way he asked it, as if he already knew the answer but wanted to hear how I'd frame it. For a long time, I couldn't speak. The room felt too small, too exposed. Finally, I said, because I felt like someone finally noticed I was there. Ryan nodded slowly, eyes on the floor, and I didn't. I wanted to tell him that he did, once, that we both stopped noticing around the same time, but I couldn't find the words that wouldn't sound like blame. I didn't plan for any of it, I said. I know, he said. You're not that kind of person. There was no sarcasm in his voice, just truth. We stood there, the faucet still running behind me, both of us realizing this was what the end of pretending felt like. No anger, no grand gesture, just two people finally saying out loud what they'd been avoiding for years. I'm not even sure it's about him, I said. It's more that he reminded me what being alive felt like. Ryan exhaled, a sound halfway between acceptance and defeat. Then I guess I just got tired first. The simplicity of it broke something open. He wasn't accusing me and I wasn't defending myself. We were just standing in the wreckage of quiet years, finally seeing what they'd done to us. He took off his watch, set it on the counter, and said, I don't want to lose you, but I also don't know who I'd be trying to keep. I didn't answer. There wasn't anything left to say that wouldn't sound rehearsed. He nodded once, as if that silence told him everything he needed to know. Later that night, we ate dinner together like we always did. The same plates, the same food, the same small table. But everything had shifted. The air felt cleaner somehow, stripped of pretense. After he went to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen. His words echoed softly. I got tired first. It wasn't anger, it was grief disguised as understanding. And maybe that's what love becomes when it runs out of fuel, something you mourn quietly without asking for sympathy. I looked at our family photo on the fridge, the three of us smiling in front of the lake years ago. Ryan's hand on my shoulder, Noah mid-laugh, my hair blown by the wind. We'd looked real then, and maybe we had been. Just not forever. Upstairs, I heard Ryan turn over in bed, the sound of someone trying to sleep through change.